Kilometer Zero, Chapter 1. The road south of Phoenix loosened its grip on the city by degrees. Streetlights thinned and spaced themselves farther apart until the last one stood alone and unbothered, a single white halo hanging over a gas station at the edge of town. Beyond it, the desert waited. The car rolled past that final island of light and entered a darkness shaped by headlights. The beams cut a narrow tunnel through dust and air, catching reflective eyes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Heat still rose from the asphalt even after sundown, a low breath that carried the day forward into night. Daniel drove the new 1958 Chevrolet Bel Air with one hand on the wheel, the other hand resting near the radio knob. He favored a careful posture behind the wheel, shoulders squared, speed steady. Since opting for the new model, he and his wife, Helen, had eschewed the finer appointments, such as auto windows and auto transmission and even air conditioning. But Daniel didn't mind. He marshaled both the power of the V8 engine and the stability of the suspension with careful precision. He was the kind of driver who read signs and believed them. Helen sat beside him with her window cracked an inch, elbow on the sill, fingers tapping softly against the door. She watched the black shapes beyond the road, the suggestion of land rather than its detail. "Next stop's Nogales," Daniel said, more to himself than to her. "Guess will be cheaper there." Helen smiled without turning. "You already said that." "Just keeping track." "You always are." He glanced over, caught the curve of her smile and profile, and returned his attention to the road. Their marriage was new enough to carry the faint sheen of ceremony, old enough to shed its carefulness. They had learned the shape of each other's habits. Daniel counted. Helen wandered. The idea for the drive had come after dinner, when the house felt too still and the air refused to cool. Helen had stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled, hands in suds, and said it without looking up. "Let's go to Mexico." Daniel had laughed. Then he had considered it. The border sat a few hours south, close enough to touch with a tank of gas and a night's patience. He pictured the map, the roads threading downward through open land. He imagined telling people later, the casual pride of it. "Just to say we did," Helen had added. Now they were doing it. The radio hissed between stations, static swelling and receding like surf. Daniel turned the knob, coaxing a signal into place. A trumpet flared briefly, then dissolved. Voices overlapped and disappeared. He left it where it was, a background sound that filled the car without demanding attention. Traffic thinned to a rarity. Once a truck passed them going north, its headlights sweeping across the windshield and vanishing into the dark behind them. The desert swallowed the sound of its engine within seconds. Helen shifted and rolled the window up a little. "It's cooler," she said. Daniel nodded. He felt it too, a subtle easing in the air, a relief that arrived without announcement. The road dipped and rose, long gentle curves that encouraged speed without asking for it. They talked about small things, a neighbor's new color RCA television, a movie they meant to see, the way the oranges at the market tasted different this year. Their words floated and settled, unhurried. When the border checkpoint appeared, it did so without ceremony. A low building sat beside the road, windows lit from within. A barrier arm rested upright, unattended. Two men stood near the door, their uniforms rumpled, their posture relaxed. One of them raised a hand as the car approached. Daniel slowed and rolled down his window. The night air rushed in, carrying the smell of dust and oil. "Buenas noches," the guard said. His voice held the flat ease of someone nearing the end of a shift. "Evening," Daniel answered. The guard was a thin and lanky man in his late 50s. He glanced into the car, his eyes passing over them without pause. "To where are you planning to go, senor?" "Just across," Daniel said. "For the night?" The guard nodded, already stepping back. "Drive safely." The barrier arm remained where it was. Daniel eased the car forward. The second guard lifted his hand in a lazy salute. The lights of the checkpoint fell behind them, their glow shrinking until it blended with the stars. Helen exhaled. That was easy. Daniel smiled. Told you. The road stretched on, unchanged at first. The radio crackled louder, static pushing forward and settling again. Daniel reached for the knob and felt a faint pressure bloom in his ears, the kind that came with altitude or weather shifts. He swallowed, flexed his jaw. Helen touched her own ear. Do you feel that? Pressure, Daniel said. Probably the heat. The head, something pale caught the headlights. A marker stood at the side of the road, its paint reflecting white against the dark. Daniel eased off the gas. The sign read, Kilometer Cero. Helen leaned forward. 0? Daniel frowned. He slowed further, letting the car roll past the marker at a crawl. That's odd. Is it? Kilometer 0 usually starts somewhere official, capital city, survey point. He shook his head. It's not on the map. Helen smiled. Maybe they started counting from here. The car passed the marker. The radio snapped sharply. A burst of static that filled the cabin, then cleared. Music rose in its place. A woman's voice carried the melody, low and unhurried, accompanied by a guitar that moved in patient steps. The words came in Spanish, shaped by a sadness that felt old and careful. The tune moved forward and circled back on itself, each phrase settling into the next with deliberate grace. Helen's hand stilled on her lap. She listened. Daniel turned the knob, expecting the station to slip away. The music remained. He turned further. The song continued, unchanged. He swept the dial across its arc. The same voice followed him, constant as a horizon. That's strange, he said. Helen closed her eyes. The song wrapped around her, carried something she recognized without naming. It felt like standing in a place she had visited once and forgotten. Her chest tightened, then eased. It's beautiful, she said. Daniel found the edge of the dial and turned it back. Static surged, then softened. The music remained, steady and present. He left it there. The road began to show its age. Fine cracks traced pale lines across the asphalt, branching and meeting in patterns that suggested time under sun and wind. The painted lines at the center wore thin, their edges feathered by passing tires. Daniel adjusted his grip on the wheel. Road crews haven't been out here for a while, he said. Helen watched the headlights play over the surface ahead. The texture of it held her attention, the way each imperfection caught the light and released it. The desert pressed closer, the land rising toward the road in low, dark shapes. The music continued. The singer's voice carried a weight that deepened with each verse. Helen felt herself drawn into its rhythm, her thoughts slowing to match it. The night seemed to widen, the stars stretching farther apart. They drove in silence for a time. Daniel focused on the road, on the way the cracks aligned and diverged. He noticed the absence of other cars, the way the darkness held steady without interruption. Helen broke the quiet. Do you ever feel like places remember things? Daniel glanced at her. Remember what? She searched for the right words. People? Passing through? The way they were? He considered this, then shrugged. Roads remember tire marks, I suppose. She smiled faintly. That's one way to put it. The pressure in Daniel's ears eased. The air felt cooler still, the heat of the day a distant memory. He checked the speedometer, adjusted slightly, and settled back into his seat. The sign lay behind them now, unseen. The road ahead opened into a long, gentle curve, the desert unfolding in shadowed layers. The music played on, a steady companion, its melody weaving itself into the night. Helen rested her head against the seat and watched the stars slide past the edge of the windshield. She felt a quiet certainty settle over her, a sense of having crossed into a place that held its own rules close and revealed them slowly. Daniel drove on, attentive and calm, unaware of the exact point where the road seemed to exist only for the moment. The desert received him without comment. The music carried its tune, and the night continued forward, unchanged in appearance and rich with promise. Chapter 2. Morning arrived without urgency. Lights spread across the desert in a gradual wash, lifting shadows rather than chasing them away. Daniel woke with the sense that the night had ended exactly where it began, as though sleep had folded neatly into waking without leaving a seam. The car sat at the edge of a small town, angled toward a low stucco building that served as both cafe and lodging. Its sign hung from two chains and bore a painted name that had faded into soft browns and creams. Helen was already awake. She stood outside near the car, arms folded loosely, watching the street as though it were a stage waiting for its first cue. The air carried a coolness that felt preserved, sheltered from the sun's eventual weight. "You didn't hear the town wake up," she said when Daniel joined her. He listened. Somewhere a door closed. Farther off, a rooster called once and then fell silent. "Seems awake enough." They went inside the cafe as the light strengthened. The room held a careful balance. Small wooden tables, worn smooth at the edges, woven chairs set squarely beneath them. A long counter tiled in pale blue. Behind it, a woman moved with steady purpose, her hair pinned back, her apron already dusted with flour. She greeted them with a nod. "Buenos dias," she said. "Buenos dias," Helen replied. The woman poured coffee into thick cups without asking. The coffee carried a deep, roasted scent that filled the room. She brought a plate a moment later, warm tortillas wrapped in cloth, a small dish of frijoles refritos, eggs folded with chili and onion, and a single buñuelo dusted with sugar. "Para empezar," the woman said. "For breakfast," Helen translated, smiling. Daniel tasted the coffee first. It settled easily, grounding him. He ate with appetite, appreciative of the simplicity, the way each flavor arrived clean and complete. Helen broke off a piece of the buñuelo, its crisp edge giving way softly. A radio rested on a shelf near the kitchen doorway. Its casing was round and heavy, the dial worn smooth by years of use. Music drifted from it at a low volume, a canción carried by guitar and voice. The melody moved slowly, repeating phrases with gentle variation as though circling a thought rather than finishing it. Helen listened, the tune resting in her with a familiarity she could not place. Around them, the cafe filled gradually. A man in a work shirt took a seat near the counter and stirred sugar into his coffee with measured care. Two older women shared a table by the wall, their conversation quiet and rhythmic. No one hurried. The door opened and closed without drawing attention. When they finished eating, Daniel left coins on the counter. The woman nodded once in acknowledgement. "Que vas va bien," she said. "Thank you," Helen told her. They stepped back into the street. The town had arranged itself fully now. The morning settled into place. Buildings stood close together, their walls bearing layers of paint laid down and refreshed over time. Signs announcing abarrotes, zapateria, panaderia, their lettering carved and deliberate, painted by hand. The street held a modest number of cars, each parked with care, their presence final rather than temporary. They walked without direction, letting the town receive them. Outside a shop, a boy guided a metal hoop along the sidewalk with a thin stick. He watched it closely, correcting its path with practiced taps. Helen paused to watch, then followed Daniel when he moved on. An hour later, after they had wandered through the square and along a narrower side street, they passed the same spot again. The boy played once more, his steps matching the earlier rhythm, the hoop tracing the same course. Helen slowed. "He's still there." Daniel glanced. "He likes it." Near the square, a folded newspaper rested on a wooden stand. Daniel picked it up. The paper felt dry, handled often but carefully. The headlines spoke of local matters, weather, a municipal notice, a church announcement. But the date was absent. "That's odd," Daniel said. Helen touched the edge of the page. "Maybe it's today's news," she said. He folded it back into place. The church bell rang later in the morning, its tone carrying across the rooftops in a single sustained note. The sound settled into the air and remained there longer than Helen expected. She checked her watch. Time had moved, though its movements felt less precise, as though the hours had loosened slightly from their markings. They returned to the cafe for a midday meal. The same woman greeted them, her nod unchanged. This time she brought bowls of caldo and fresh bread without comment. The radio played again, the same song returning among others shaped in a similar pace. A man at the counter hummed along softly, his voice aligning easily with the tune. "Siempre ha estado aquí," an older woman said from a nearby table, her voice calm. Helen turned. "La música." The woman nodded. "See?" She smiled and returned to her soup. "It's always been here," Helen said to Daniel. In the afternoon, the heat settled lightly rather than pressing down. The shadows shortened and then held their shape, their edges steady. Daniel suggested they rest before leaving that evening. Helen agreed, though she felt no weariness in her body. In the room, the window stood open to the street. A wooden chair rested near the door. Helen moved it closer to the window and sat for a while, watching the square below. She watched as a delivery truck passed through the square at an even pace, its engine sound fading into the distance. Later, as the afternoon lengthened, they walked again. Near dusk, when they crossed the square once more, the truck appeared again. It rolled by them, its passage unfolding with the same measured timing. Daniel spoke of the drive north, of the road and the border. He read from a magazine he had brought, his attention lingering longer on each page. He explained the quiet to himself in familiar terms: distance, size, custom. Helen watched the light shift across walls and pavement. She felt a certainty growing, delicate and persistent. The town moved through its hours with care, each action fitting into a pattern held gently in place. As evening approached, music drifted in from somewhere beyond the square, carried on a guitar's steady rhythm. Helen stood at the window and listened, aware that the town did not lean toward tomorrow. Instead, it held the day as a whole, complete and preserved, remembering itself with quiet devotion. Chapter 3. The afternoon thinned toward evening with the same patient care that had shaped the morning. Light softened along the edges of buildings, gathering in warm patches on whitewashed walls. The town moved as it had all day, each gesture complete in itself. Helen noticed the chair first. It stood in the corner near the door, its back angled slightly. She'd sat in it earlier when watching the town square. Now, when she looked again, the chair held the exact angle it had before she moved it. The same scuff mark near one leg aligned with the tile beneath. She touched it lightly. The wood felt warm from the air. She carried it a few steps and placed it beside the window again. From there she could see the square and the low hills beyond. She turned her gaze back inside. Daniel called from the other room. "Do you want a coffee?" he asked. She looked out the window. "I think so." In the cafe, the proprietor brought fresh coffee without comment. He smiled and said, "Hace calor." Helen nodded. "Sí," she replied. She turned to Daniel. "He says it's warm today." Daniel smiled politely. "Feels that way." They ate slowly. The plate held tortillas wrapped in cloth, beans dark and glossy, eggs folded with chilies and onion. The flavors carried a simplicity shaped by repetition, each bite familiar even as it remained distinct. Helen tasted corn and smoke and salt, the food carrying the same steady completeness she felt elsewhere. Across the room, the radio played softly. The melody returned again, unhurried, its rhythm shaped by waiting rather than urgency. A man at the next table hummed under his breath, his voice sliding into the song as though it had always belonged there. Afterward, they walked toward the edge of town. The street narrowed, the buildings thinning into low houses and open yards. Women stood near doorways, shelling beans into bowls, their movements aligned and practiced. One of them looked up and greeted Helen. "Buenas tardes." "Buenas tardes," Helen replied. The woman smiled and said something longer, her words flowing with gentle certainty. "She's asking if we're enjoying the day," Helen told Daniel. "Yes," Daniel said. "Very much." He waved to them. The woman nodded, satisfied, and returned to her work. They reached a small stand where an older man poured agua fresca from a clay jar into tin cups. The liquid caught the light, pale and clouded, scented faintly with fruit. He handed them each a cup. "Para el camino," he said. "For the road," Helen translated. Daniel drank and felt the coolness settle into him. "That's good," he said. The man smiled. "Siempre?" "Always." They thanked him and continued on. The road ahead sloped gently upward, the town giving way to scrub and stone. Daniel stopped walking and looked out. "Wish you had back soon," he said, "before it gets dark." Helen studied the road. It held a muted shimmer, as though light rested just beneath its surface. "In a little while," she said. "I want to see where it goes." Daniel checked his watch. The hands moved, though their progress felt less tied to the sun's position. He nodded. "All right." They walked farther. The music followed them, carried on the air, its source shifting and settling. Helen became aware of the sky's quality. Clouds held their shape longer than she expected, their edges steady, the blue between them deep and consistent. They came upon an old woman seated on a low stool near a doorway. Her hair was pulled back, her hands resting in her lap. She watched them approach with a calm attention. "Buenas tardes," Helen said. The woman smiled. "Buenas tardes." Her voice carried a quiet firmness. She spoke again, slowly. Helen listened, then frowned slightly. She says, "This place doesn't go forward." Daniel laughed softly. "What does that mean?" Helen hesitated, then translated the rest. "She says it waits." The woman nodded, as though confirming a shared understanding. She added another sentence. "She says the road used to pass here," Helen continued, "before the new one." Daniel looked around. "I don't see any signs of construction." The woman's gaze remained steady. She spoke again. "She says night is coming," Helen said, "and that we should leave before then." Daniel thanked her. Helen echoed him. They walked on in silence. At the edge of town, the road changed. For a few yards, the asphalt carried a smooth, dark sheen, new and unmarked. Then it shifted back to its earlier texture, cracked and pale. The transition held no seam, no clear boundary. Daniel stopped. "That's strange." Helen watched the surface ripple subtly, the light playing across it. "It's deciding," she said. "Deciding what?" "Which road it wants to be." Daniel shook his head. "We've been out in the heat all day." They turned back toward town as dusk approached. The buildings received the lowering sun with quiet acceptance, their colors deepening without change in form. The bell rang once more, its tones settling into the air. In their room, Helen packed slowly. She folded her dress, placed it in the suitcase, then paused. She felt a pull toward the window, toward the square below where the day held itself whole. "I don't want to leave," she said. Daniel looked up. "Why?" "It's complete," she said. "Everything here fits." He closed the suitcase. "So does home." She met his eyes. "Home keeps moving." The music rose again as evening settled. Helen listened, aware of its patience, its willingness to wait as long as needed. Outside, the town prepared for night with the same measured care it had shown all day. They stood together, the decision forming between them, shaped by habit and recognition. As the last light slipped away, they understood that leaving required more than turning the car north. It required stepping out of a place that held its moment intact, complete and waiting, as long as someone remained to see it. Chapter 4. They left after sunset. The town accepted their departure without ceremony. Doors closed with measured finality. Lamps were lit, their glow held close to walls and windows. The music lingered as they walked to the car, its rhythm steady and unhurried, a presence that accompanied rather than followed. Daniel drove. Helen sat with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze resting on the road ahead. The engine's sound carried clearly in the evening air. When Daniel reached for the radio, he paused. The dial rested in place. The speaker held silence. He turned the knob. The silence remained, smooth and complete. He left it there. The road led them north through darkness shaped by headlights. The surface beneath the tires carried a new quality. It felt even, continuous, a long, unbroken line that accepted the car's passage without comment. Daniel noticed the steadiness first, the way the steering wheel required less correction. Helen watched the desert slide past. The land appeared familiar and distant at once, its contours held in shadow. She felt the same pressure in her ears she had felt the night before, though it eased quickly, settling into a calm that traveled inward. They reached the border crossing near midnight. Lights stood brighter than she remembered, their white glare spreading across fresh pavement. The building carried sharper lines, its windows newly set. A guard stepped forward, his posture alert, his uniform crisp. "Evening," he said. Daniel rolled down the window. "Evening?" The guard glanced at their papers, then into the car. His eyes paused, then moved on. "Enjoy your trip?" "Yes," Daniel said. The guard nodded, returned the documents, and lifted his hand. "Drive safe." They crossed through. The road beyond held the same smooth certainty. Neither of them spoke for several miles. The desert opened wide again, the stars arranged with careful distance. The car moved easily, its path direct and untroubled. Helen looked back once. The road behind them extended clean and uninterrupted, its surface pale and new. No marker stood at its edge. No sign marked a beginning. Daniel broke the silence. "Must have done some work out here." Helen nodded. "It feels different." He smiled faintly. "Progress." They drove on. By dawn, Phoenix announced itself through sound. Traffic gathered. Radios from other cars carried voices and advertisements. Signs crowded the roadside, their colors insistent. Daniel felt the familiar tightening of schedule and distance returning to its place. At home, Helen unpacked slowly. She placed her clothes in drawers, her movements deliberate. The house greeted them with familiar angles and surfaces, each object positioned with intention rather than memory. Later that morning, Daniel spread a map across the kitchen table. He traced a route with his finger, following the road south of the border. He paused. "That's odd," he said. Helen joined him. The map showed a rerouted highway, its line bending east before reaching the border. A small notation marked an older road, discontinued. "The town?" Helen asked. Daniel scanned the page. "No listing." He looked closer. "There used to be a junction here." Helen imagined a square, the cafe, the bell. She pictured the chair aligned with the wall, the boy's hoop tracing its patient circle. "They moved the road," she said. Daniel nodded. "Happens." Days passed. Life resumed its forward motion. Daniel returned to work. Helen shopped, cooked, listened to the radio. The music she heard carried a faster pace, its voices eager and bright. Sometimes late in the evening, she found herself standing near the window, listening beyond the sounds of the street. She felt a quiet longing for the measured hours, the way each moment in the town held itself complete. Daniel noticed a change. "You miss it," he said once. She considered. "I miss how it felt." He took her hand. "We can go back." Helen shook her head. "I don't think it would be fair." Far south, beyond the newly paved road, the desert held its shapes. Light faded and returned in its time. Where the old road once lay, the land remembered a sequence of steps, a song carried on air, a town held intact by attention. When night settled and the right conditions gathered, the music began again, moving patiently through the dark, waiting for the sound of tires and the presence of someone passing through. Rather than being a world into which travelers crossed, this one was instead a world that manifested. They had traveled briefly through a place that kept its moment whole, offering it to those who arrived and releasing it once they moved on.